Before radiators hummed and double glazing sealed out the cold, Britain kept warm the old-fashioned way. Through the kitchen, cast-iron stoves glowed, coal fires smoked, and hearty suppers bubbled slowly on the range, feeding families through the long, dark months. These were the dinners that steamed up windows and thawed frozen fingers, the kind of food that hugged you from the inside. Born of thrift and tradition, they didn't just fill bellies, they kept a nation alive through icy winters and drafty homes. Let's step back to when warmth came from the hearth, not the boiler. Here are 25 winter dinners that kept Britain warm before central heating. Steak and ale pie was Britain's answer to winter itself, a dish that filled the belly and thawed the bones. In pubs and home kitchens alike, it began with the cheapest cuts of beef, browned in a heavy pan before being slowly simmered in dark ale. The house would fill with a deep, malty scent as the gravy thickened and the meat softened to perfection. Carrots, onions, and a spoonful of mustard might find their way in, but the real magic was the pastry. Buttery short crust or puff, rolled thick and baked golden, it sealed in all that rich, boozy flavor until it was ready to burst forth with the first slice. Served piping hot with mashed potatoes and peas, it was a meal that chased away every draught in the house. Families gathered around steaming plates, gravy dripping and laughter rising, the cold forgotten for a while. Steak and ale pie wasn't just food. It was tradition, hospitality, and home-cooked warmth in its most delicious form. On Scotland's wind-swept coast, Cullen's skink was more than soup. It was survival. Born in the fishing village of Cullen in Moray, it was a simple way to stretch the day's catch into something nourishing and comforting. Smoked haddock was simmered gently with onions and potatoes in milk until it broke apart into soft flakes, thickening the broth into a creamy, smoky stew. The scent of fish and butter mingled with the salt of the sea air, a promise of warmth on the coldest night. Traditionally eaten with bread for dipping, it was hearty enough to serve as both dinner and defense against the chill rolling in from the North Sea. Every spoonful was rich, velvety, and faintly sweet from the onions. In homes where central heating was a fantasy, a steaming bowl of Cullen skink could do the job just as well. It was the kind of dish that didn't just feed you, it wrapped you in a blanket of comfort from the inside out. Mutton broth was the sound of winter bubbling on the stove. Once the go-to meal for shepherds and mill workers alike, it turned tough, cheap cuts of mutton into something rich, thick, and sustaining. The meat simmered for hours with barley, carrots, turnips, and onions, slowly breaking down into a tender, fragrant stew that filled the house with warmth. A thin layer of fat might settle on top, a sign of flavor, not neglect, skimmed or stirred back in depending on taste. It was eaten steaming hot from chipped bowls, often with crusty bread to soak up the last drops. Nothing fancy, just honest, slow-cooked comfort. Each mouthful delivered the kind of warmth that radiated long after the bowl was empty. In homes without radiators or insulation, mutton broth was its own kind of heating. Cheap, nourishing, and packed with life-sustaining strength. It reminded families that even in hard winters, patience and a pot of soup could make the world feel soft again. The whole was the smell of supper on a dark, foggy evening. Simple ingredients transformed into comfort. Thick Yorkshire pudding batter was poured around sizzling sausages, the fat spitting and crackling as it hit the hot tin. As it baked, the batter rose into golden peaks around the sausages, crisp at the edges, soft and doughy in the middle. The smell of roasting meat and flour filled the kitchen, seeping into every corner of the house. Served with rich onion gravy and a side of peas or carrots, it was a dish that made the cold outside irrelevant. Every bite combined texture and nostalgia, the crunch of batter, the savory punch of sausage, the silky gravy tying it all together. Cheap, filling, and utterly British, it was the perfect answer to long, frosty evenings. Even as central heating replaced coal fires, toad in the hole remained proof that true warmth still came from the oven, not the thermostat. Lancashire hotpot was the North's secret weapon. Against winter, a one-pot meal that could simmer all day while the wind howled outside. Thinly sliced potatoes were layered with lamb or mutton, onions, and sometimes carrots, all seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and a splash of stock. The top layer of potatoes baked into a crisp, golden crust, while the layers beneath turned soft, silky, and rich with flavor. It filled homes with the kind of aroma that drew neighbors in from the street. Eaten straight from the oven, steaming and hearty, it could silence even the noisiest table. The beauty of it was its thrift. The cheapest cuts, slow cooking, and nothing wasted. Factory workers and mill families lived on hotpot through the coldest months, its steady warmth as dependable as the fire that cooked it. Lancashire hotpot wasn't just food. It was community, comfort, and survival baked into a dish. Every bite was a reminder that simplicity could still taste like abundance. Kedgeree might have begun as a colonial import, but by the time British winters claimed it, it had become pure comfort food. Once considered a breakfast dish, it worked just as well for supper. Flaked, smoked fish, soft boiled eggs, and warm rice, all stirred through with butter and curry spices. The fragrance was gentle but uplifting, a whisper of warmth in a damp, drafty house. Housewives loved it for its thrift. A little fish went a long way, and the rice made sure no one left hungry. Each forkful was creamy, savory, and just spiced enough to wake the senses without alarming them. Served steaming from a heavy pan, it was the kind of dish that made the world beyond the kitchen fade away. In the flicker of the gaslight or the glow of the range, Kedgeree was both exotic and homely, a bowl of sunshine smuggled into the British winter, one buttery bite at a time. Bacon and lentil soup was the heartbeat of the farmhouse kitchen, a pot of comfort simmering. Low and slow through the afternoon. Lentils, those humble little gems, stretched meat further than any butcher could. A handful of them, an onion or two, a carrot, and a few scraps of bacon or a ham bone were all it took to make something thick and nourishing. The scent of it filled the house, drifting through cold hallways and under closed doors, promising warmth long before supper. It was practical food, hearty, simple, and rich in flavor despite its meager ingredients. The bacon lent a smoky saltiness that deepened with every stir, turning thrift into luxury. Served with a chunk of bread, it warmed hands and hearts alike. There was nothing fancy about it, but on cold winter nights it was a meal that restored both body and spirit. A bowl of bacon and lentil soup didn't just feed you, it fortified you against the cold outside. Before mashed potato became the standard topping, many northern families sealed their cottage pies with a thick suet. Crust, a hearty golden lid built to hold in the heat. Beneath it bubbled minced beef, onions, and carrots, cooked down in a rich gravy until tender and savory. The suet pastry, humble and substantial, puffed up slightly as it baked, turning chewy at the edges and soft in the middle. The smell of it emerging from the oven could stop a room in its tracks. It was fuel for long winters, a dish that filled both plate and stomach with equal satisfaction. Breaking through the crust to reach the steaming mince beneath was a ritual, the first bite melting away the day's chill. It was simple, rustic food, made to last and to comfort, a working man's armor against frost and fatigue. Cottage pie with suet crust wasn't elegant, but it was everything a winter meal should be: hot, honest, and heavy enough to hold you steady until spring. Game stew was the taste of the countryside in winter, dark, rich, and alive with the depth of the season. Pheasant, rabbit, pigeon, or whatever the local hunter could spare went into the pot, browned with onions and garlic, then drowned in stock and a splash of red wine, if fortune smiled. Carrots, parsnips, and mushrooms followed, each absorbing the meaty essence as it simmered for hours. The scent that filled the kitchen was wild and heady, something between smoke and earth. Served steaming with a thick wedge of bread or buttery mash, it was a dish that brought color back to the cheeks and life back to the body. In hard winters, nothing felt more luxurious. The flavors were bold but comforting, a celebration of both nature's bounty and man's resourcefulness. For those who lived close to the land, game stew was more than food. It was gratitude, survival, and warmth made visible in a single steaming bowl. Irish stew was the kind of meal that didn't need a recipe, only patience and a good fire. Layers of mutton, onions, and potatoes were stacked in a heavy pot, covered with water, and left to simmer for hours. What emerged was alchemy: tender meat, soft vegetables, and a broth so rich it could warm even the coldest stone cottage. Every household had its version. Some added carrots or barley, others swore by nothing but salt and thyme. The smell of it was enough to draw a family in from the frost. Coats hung by the door as they gathered around steaming bowls. It was food that fortified, simple yet mighty. Each spoonful carried the sweetness of slow-cooked onions and the depth of well-earned flavor. Served with thick bread or nothing at all, it didn't just fill a stomach. It fed a soul. Irish stew wasn't made to impress. It was made to endure, to comfort, and to remind you that home could always be found in a pot. Bubble and roast was what happened the day after Sunday dinner, a thrifty ritual that turned leftovers into something even better. Cold roasted potatoes, carrots, and parsnips were chopped up and fried with scraps of meat in a hot pan of dripping. The mixture sizzled and hissed, sending up the smell of caramelized edges and smoky gravy. It was less a recipe, more a celebration of resourcefulness. The crispy bits clung to the bottom of the pan, golden and irresistible, while the soft vegetables soaked up every bit of flavor. Families gathered round, spoons clinking, talking over the sound of frying. Served straight from the pan, it was earthy, messy, and glorious. No two batches were ever the same. That was part of its magic. Bubble and roast didn't just reheat food, it reignited warmth and togetherness. In homes where every scrap mattered, it proved that leftovers could still feel like a feast. A second helping of Sunday's comfort in Monday's chill. Leek and potato soup was Welsh comfort in its purest form, simple, buttery, and made for long winters. Every farm, every kitchen and miner's cottage had its own pot simmering on the stove, the leeks softening slowly with diced potatoes in a base of milk or stock. The smell was gentle but irresistible, sweet onion mingling with earthy potato and the faint scent of butter melting into the mix. Blended smooth or left chunky, it was the kind of soup that hugged you from the inside. Served with a thick wedge of bread or a pat of cheese on the side, it filled you without fuss. It was cheap to make and impossible to tire of. A meal for all classes and every cold evening. Children might grumble at its simplicity, but they always scraped the bowl clean. In homes where warmth came from the hearth, not the heater, leek and potato soup was its own kind of radiance. A steaming reminder that the best things are often the simplest. Fish pie was the soft, creamy comfort of the British winter table. It began with chunks of white fish, haddock, cod, or whatever the fishmonger had cheapest, poached gently in milk with a bay leaf and a few peppercorns. Once flaked and mixed with peas, boiled eggs, and a velvety white sauce, it was poured into a deep dish and topped with mashed potatoes flecked with parsley. The pie baked until golden and bubbling, filling the kitchen with the smell of warmth and care. Breaking through the crust revealed steam, soft fish, and buttery sauce that pooled like silk on the plate. It was a meal that soothed in every sense, both light and rich at once. Families gathered around it like a beacon on cold evenings, spoons scraping until nothing was left. Fish pie with parsley mash was proof that comfort could be simple, affordable, and utterly British. Hot food for cold nights, the taste of home when frost laced the windows. Rabbit and cider casserole was the countryside's answer to a biting winter wind. In farm cottages and small village. In homes, a freshly caught rabbit, once the cheapest protein you could find, was browned with onions and herbs before being bathed in sweet, cloudy cider. As it simmered, the kitchen filled with the aroma of apples, thyme, and wood smoke, a scent that lingered long after supper. The meat grew tender, falling from the bone, the sauce reducing into something both sweet and savory, faintly sharp from the cider's edge. Served with creamy mash or hunks of crusty bread, it was a dish that tasted like the land itself, humble, hearty, and deeply satisfying. In an age before central heating, this casserole warmed more than just the body. It told a story of thrift, patience, and the quiet pride of country living. Simple ingredients, cooked slowly and eaten gratefully. Proof that warmth was something you made, not something you switched on. Hogmanay stovies were Scotland's way of turning yesterday's feast into today's comfort. Traditionally made from the remains of the New Year roast, stovies combined sliced potatoes, onions, and leftover meat, usually beef or mutton, slowly stewed in dripping until everything melded into one glorious, every mass. The color might have been gray, but the flavor was gold, salty, rich, and satisfying. The smell of onions frying in fat was enough to pull everyone to the kitchen table. No exact recipe existed. Every family had their version, passed down and fiercely defended. Some swore by adding a splash of gravy or a spoonful of pepper. Others insisted on keeping it plain. What mattered most was that it was hot, hearty, and enough to fill every stomach. Eaten with oatcakes or pickled beetroot, it was the taste of celebration turned to sustenance. Stovies weren't fancy, but they were the essence of Scottish warmth, born from leftovers, perfected by love. Mince collops was the workhorse of the Scottish winter kitchen, humble, thick, and brimming with comfort. It began with minced beef fried with onions and a handful of oats, then simmered gently in stock until it reached a texture somewhere between stew and porridge. The oats thickened the gravy, turning it glossy and satisfying while stretching every ounce of meat further. A dash of Worcestershire sauce or a spoon of brown sugar might find its way in, but it needed little else. Served with mashed neeps or tatties, it was the sort of meal that warmed you from the inside out. Mince collops filled stomachs and quieted worries. It was food for long nights and low wages, a dish of practicality elevated by patience. Its simplicity was its genius, affordable, nourishing, and deeply Scottish. The first spoonful was warmth, the last was reassurance. In a draughty house, a bowl of collops could feel like a roaring fire. Liver casserole with bacon was a dish that turned strong flavors into sheer comfort. The preparation began with frying onions until soft and sweet, then adding strips of streaky bacon to render their fat before the slices of liver joined the pan. Once browned, everything went into a casserole dish, bathed in beef stock and a dash of red wine or gravy browning. As it baked slowly in the oven, the sauce thickened into a glossy, savory gravy, and the liver softened until it melted with every bite. The smell was deep and meaty, the kind of aroma that wrapped around you like a blanket on a cold evening. Served with mashed potatoes or boiled cabbage, it was fortifying food for hard-working families. It might have been an acquired taste, but it was one that spoke of thrift and nourishment. In the chill of a British winter, few meals felt as hearty or as honest as a bubbling dish of liver and bacon. Scotch broth was Scotland's winter anthem, a thick, hearty soup that could feed a family for days. It started with lamb bones or a mutton shank simmered for hours, slowly releasing their flavor into the stock. To this, housewives added barley, carrots, leeks, and turnips, letting the mixture bubble gently until it thickened into something almost solid. The smell filled the home long before the meal arrived, a rich aroma of meat and earth that made the cold outside irrelevant. The barley gave the broth body, turning it from soup into sustenance, while the vegetables added sweetness and color. Served with oatcakes or bread, it was a meal in itself, warm, filling, and deeply traditional. Every spoonful felt like an act of kindness, a taste of Scotland's resilience through generations of harsh winters. Scotch broth wasn't glamorous, but it was beloved. The kind of dish that didn't just warm your hands, but thawed your very soul. Steak pudding was Britain's crowning glory of cold weather cooking, a meal that defined the meaning of comfort. Chunks of beef and kidney were stewed in rich, dark gravy before being sealed inside a thick suet crust. The pudding was then steamed for hours, the sound of bubbling water filling the kitchen with anticipation. When the cloth was finally unwrapped, the sight was pure theatre. Glossy, glistening pastry giving way to tender meat and gravy so rich it coated the spoon. The first slice released a plume of steam scented with ale, onions, and sheer satisfaction. Served with mashed potatoes and greens, it could silence the entire table. Suet pudding was a dish of patience, one that rewarded the cook as much as the eater. Heavy, hearty, and built to last, it was the edible equivalent of a roaring fire. On the bleakest winter evenings, steak pudding didn't just feed you, it revived you. Pea and ham soup was the steady heartbeat of winter kitchens across Britain, a thick, smoky brew that stretched a ham bone into something miraculous. Split peas simmered slowly in stock, breaking down into a creamy, hearty base, while carrots, onions, and herbs added sweetness and depth. The ham hock, boiled until tender, was shredded into the pot, giving every spoonful a salty richness. It was a dish that demanded patience and rewarded thrift. A single bone could flavor a family's meals for days. The smell was unmistakable, earthy, meaty, comforting, and it lingered in the air long after supper. Served with doorsteps of bread and a thick layer of butter, it was warmth in liquid form, simple yet luxurious in its own way. Every household had its version, but the result was always the same: satisfaction that lasted all night. Pea and ham soup wasn't just food, it was central heating in a bowl. Bubble dumplings were the heart of a proper winter stew, a simple trick that turned thin broth into a full, satisfying meal. Made from flour, suet, and water, the dough was shaped into rough balls and dropped straight into the bubbling pot. As they cooked, they soaked up the rich flavors of the meat and vegetables, puffing up into soft, sticky pillows of warmth. The name came from the sound they made, gently bobbing and simmering at the surface while the family waited in anticipation. Cheap to make and impossible to ruin, they were the cook's secret to stretching a meal just a little further. Served steaming from the pot, they were soft in the middle, slightly chewy at the edge, and heavy enough to keep the cold at bay. In homes where the fire was the only source of heat, bubble dumplings did double duty, filling stomachs and warming hearts. Each one tasted of thrift, comfort, and quiet care. Shepherd's broth was the quick, liquid cousin of the classic shepherd's pie. Humble, hearty, and designed to stretch little into plenty. It began with minced meat, onions, and whatever vegetables were at hand, all fried gently in dripping before being simmered with stock. A handful of oats or barley thickened the mix, turning it from soup into sustenance. The smell of it cooking was enough to thaw out the coldest cottage. Unlike a pie, there was no need for an oven, just a sturdy pot and a bit of patience. It was perfect for winter nights when the larder was running low, but warmth was still needed in the belly. Ladled into bowls and eaten with bread, it fed whole families for pennies. The broth was meaty and slightly smoky, the oats giving it a creamy texture that clung to the spoon. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. A working meal for working people, made to chase the chill away and keep strength in weary bones. Haggis, neeps, and tatties is Scotland's most famous winter meal, a dish that's as hearty as the hills and as warming as a whiskey by the fire. Traditionally served at Burns night suppers, it became a regular feature of cold weather dinners across the country. The haggis, made from minced offal, oats, onions, and spices, was boiled for hours until rich, peppery, and bursting with flavor. Served alongside buttery mashed potatoes, the tatties, and sweet mashed swede or turnip, the neeps, it created a perfect balance of savory and sweet, soft and comforting. The smell of haggis cooking filled every corner of the house, earthy, spiced, and deeply satisfying. It was food that didn't just fill stomachs, it fortified spirits. In the chill of January, few things brought people together like this steaming trio on the table. Heavy, honest, and proud of its roots, haggis, neeps, and tatties wasn't just a meal. It was Scotland's way of laughing in winter's cold face. Before supper became a late-night indulgence, it was a quiet ritual by the fire, and nothing summed it up better than bread and cheese. Thick slices of crusty loaf, sometimes warmed by the hearth, were paired with sharp farmhouse cheddar or crumbly Cheshire, a knife of butter nearby if you were lucky. Some added a pickled onion or a smear of mustard. Others simply ate it plain, savoring the simplicity. The meal was as humble as it gets, yet it held all the comfort of home. In the days before television and central heating, families sat close to the fire, their hands wrapped around mugs of tea or ale, the crackle of the grate their only soundtrack. The heat from the bread, the salt of the cheese, and the company of loved ones were warmth enough. Bread and cheese supper wasn't about feasting. It was about peace, gratitude, and a reminder that even the simplest food could feel like luxury on a winter's night. Treacle dumplings were Britain's sweet antidote to winter. Simple suet puddings boiled in golden syrup until sticky, steaming, and irresistible. Made from flour, suet, and a splash of milk, the dough was rolled into balls and dropped into a pan where syrup bubbled thickly at the bottom. As they cooked, the dumplings absorbed the syrup's warmth, turning soft and sweet, each one coated in a glossy amber glaze. The smell alone could heat a room. Sugar, butter, and nostalgia all rolled together. Served straight from the pot, they were rich enough to silence even the hungriest family, especially when drowned in custard. For those who grew up before central heating, treacle dumplings were as close as dessert came to a fireside hug. They stuck to your ribs, sweetened the evening, and left everyone glowing. Cheap, cheerful, and proudly British, this humble pudding proved that even in the hardest winters, a little sweetness could still melt the cold away. Feeling nostalgic for proper winter dinners? Hit subscribe for more steaming plates of old-fashioned British warmth. And let us know, which of these would you bring back to your table this winter?